You know that feeling when you want something so badly it actually hurts? Well, today we're diving into something just like that, but on a whole other level. We're talking about a profound spiritual state described almost 500 years ago by the mystic Saint Teresa of Avila. She described a longing so intense it was like a beautiful torment. So let's get into what she actually meant.
A painful, though delicious, torture. I mean, just think about that phrase for a second. That's the core paradox we're going to unpack. How can something possibly be agonizing and wonderful all at once? Well, for St. Teresa, this was the perfect way to describe this overwhelming, all-consuming desire to be united with God. It's a feeling so powerful, it literally changes your whole experience of being alive.
Okay, so to really get a handle on this, let's dive into what this state feels like. What was St. Teresa really getting at with this idea of a delicious, painful torture?
She actually calls it a spiritual impulse. And look, this isn't just some casual thought or a passing mood. No, this is like an all-consuming fire in your soul. It's a deep, constant ache to be with God. And it gets so strong that just, regular life, your job, your chores, all of it starts to feel like a bunch of chains holding you back from the one thing you really want.
And what's so fascinating here is that St. Teresa doesn't just leave it at that, as some vague feeling. She actually breaks down the specific symptoms of this spiritual condition. It's like she creates this incredibly detailed psychological portrait of what's going on. And this is so important. This is not just being sad or depressed. The person longs for death. But, and this is the key, it's not out of despair. It's because they see it as the only way to finally be united with God. They feel this sense of helplessness, like they can never do enough. And even being alone becomes this weird paradox. It's a relief from the world, but it also just makes that deep longing feel even more intense, almost unbearable.
And she has this brilliant way of illustrating the feeling. She uses this metaphor of a butterfly that's just desperate to fly, but it's chained down. Imagine that. The soul knows exactly where it wants to go, but it's stuck here, trapped in this life, and it can't reach its destination. It's such a powerful image, right? This feeling of being spiritually imprisoned.
So, as you can imagine, this leads to a massive internal conflict. On one shoulder, you've got the soul being pulled toward these incredible, intense spiritual feelings. But on the other, there's this nagging, gnawing fear. Wait a minute, what if this isn't from God at all? What if I'm being tricked by the devil? I mean, that creates this huge anxiety inside, a real battle between this irresistible pull and a truly terrifying doubt.
And that fear, it's not just paranoia. St. Teresa was crystal clear about this. This spiritual path is loaded with dangers, and the risk of fooling yourself, well, it's very, very real.
Which brings us to the million-dollar question she tackles head-on. If you're going through something this intense, how on earth can you be sure it's the real deal? How do you know it's a genuine spiritual impulse and not, emotional instability or, as she puts it, a trick of the devil?
So St. Teresa actually gives us a kind of checklist to tell the difference. A true impulse, she says, is ultimately soothing and gentle, even when it's super intense. It leaves you with a feeling of peace and makes you want to go out and do good things. The fake out, on the other hand, that's stormy. It often comes from what she calls bodily weakness, like being unwell or melancholic, and it just leaves you feeling drained, agitated, and kind of worse off.
And she has this really specific warning about tears. Apparently, she saw people who would get into these fits of uncontrollable weeping, and they'd think, wow, this must mean I'm super holy. But she says, hold on a second. She actually cautioned against this, believing that the devil could use these huge emotional outbursts to wear a person down, both physically and spiritually, and basically distract them from what really matters, true prayer and good works.
Okay, so if this whole experience is so painful and filled with all these dangers, you have to ask, what's the point, right? Why would God even allow this to happen? Well, according to St. Teresa, there is a very deep, profound purpose behind this whole trial.
And the purpose is, well, it's huge. It's designed to completely obliterate our self-love and our pride. Think about it. When you experience a longing for something so far beyond yourself, you're forced to face your own limitations, your own vileness, as she bluntly puts it. And in that moment of seeing how small we are, we suddenly get a much, much deeper appreciation for the greatness of God. It's a painful lesson in humility, for sure, but a necessary one.
This leads right into her practical advice, and she frames it with this beautiful metaphor. The goal, she says, isn't to force the rain. You can't just make yourself cry or feel these big emotions. Instead, the job is to prepare the parched soil of your soul. That way, when divine grace does come, your soul is ready to absorb it.
So, how do you do that?
how do you tend the soil? Well, first, she says to focus on action. Practice virtues, do good works, don't just sit around getting lost in your feelings. Second, you have to accept whatever comes your way. Don't try to force a certain feeling. Just trust that God will give you what you need, whether that's water or drought. And finally, again, don't force the emotions. Just put yourself in God's presence and trust the process.
Okay, so after weathering this crazy storm of longing and doubt and after following all this practical advice, St. Teresa says the soul finally arrives somewhere completely new and totally unexpected.
Jubilation. Just one word. It's this sudden, powerful shift. After all that pain, all that struggle, the soul is just flooded with this strange, almost otherworldly kind of joy.
And we're not talking about some quiet, private little happiness here. No. St. Teresa says the joy is so overwhelming, so excessive, that the soul just wants to shout it from the rooftops. She even compares it to the father of the prodigal son, who wants to throw this massive party and invite everyone to come celebrate. And there's a real security in this joy. The soul finally feels safe and knows, for sure, that this happiness is real.
She has this incredible term for it, spiritual inebriation. It's like being drunk on joy. The person becomes so forgetful of themselves, of all their worries, that all they can think about, all they can do, is praise God. It's a total absorption in this joy, a complete release from that painful longing that started this whole crazy journey.
And that leaves us with a pretty fascinating thought to chew on, doesn't it? I mean, sure, St. Teresa's account from the 16th century is about a very specific spiritual path, but it really points to a pattern you see everywhere, a universal experience. It just makes you wonder, right? What if our greatest, most profound moments of joy aren't found by trying to avoid pain? What if they're actually born directly from our deepest and most difficult struggles?